Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we have a strange one. I decided to do in our Passover theme Ezekiel 45. So when you read Ezekiel 45, you are going to see that it is deep in the prophetic vision parts of Ezekiel. Now, one of the things that you have to remember is Ezekiel is having a vision of the temple. The context is really important for this. So earlier in Ezekiel, he had a vision of the current temple, and it's corrupt and it's broken, and all sorts of wrong things are going on. So later, much later in Ezekiel, he gets a vision of a new temple, and it has this like all of these measurements and everything else. You're going to see that in part of what we read today, and it's all very detailed about this is where the gates are going to be. This is all of these types of things. And when you're reading that, it can be so easy to get lost in those details and miss the point of why that's going on. So, firstly, the important thing to know is that Ezekiel's temple is too big to fit in Jerusalem, like where the temple is. Even Herod's temple, which is massive and huge, is much smaller than this. This would be like it would be massive. You would not be able to build it in the current spot where the temple in Jerusalem is. So this is a really important detail, because what is that going to tell you? It's going to tell you that this is a metaphorical, spiritual vision of what the future is going to look like and what that is going to be. So I think it's really important that you focus on that and not on the details. That's what it means. It means that there's going to be this spiritual vision of what the temple is supposed to be. So, like, just as an example, right, the acres of the Temple Mount now, in our terminology, are 36 acres. The acres that would take up Ezekiel's temple is 630 acres, right? So it's not even close to how big it is, and that's purposeful. And if you actually look at the cubits size, they double as it goes through. And then eventually all of this is important just for our New Testament because it plays into Revelation and Revelation's vision of the final city of Jerusalem, and it's borrowing a lot of language from this. So just know that. So that's where it starts, okay? And it builds up. Everything is heightened. That's what I'm getting at. Everything is bigger. It's building on all the requirements of the law, and it's building up even more. So what is it saying? It's saying, unlike this last temple, which is broken and not holy, you have a much holier place, and all of the requirements are growing. Now, see this, right? So then it talks about this guy named the Prince. Now, the Prince, it might be easy for us to go, oh, this is Jesus. Now, we might want to say this is a shadow of a type of Jesus, a shadow of the Messiah who makes intercession as a king for his people, which absolutely happens. It's not a perfect comparison, though, right? Because the Prince has to make sin offerings for himself. So you could say this is an ideal political leader, like this is the ideal Christian, maybe, who even is sacrificing out of their own wealth for the spiritual betterment of their nation or their people or whatever else, right? This is not like a completely messianic figure. This is a political figure, and maybe an ideal political figure at that. But he is going to do an important thing, which is offer these sacrifices, and then we get to what I wanted to talk about today, which is the Passover section of this. So one of the things you'll notice about the Passover section of this is that it changes quite a bit of things from the Passover, especially what's required. Now, again, right, this is we always have to remember that this is a prophetic picture of the future. Everything is heightened. So one of the things you'll notice is that instead of like all these all these things, you actually have to offer these huge sacrifices, right? So like in Numbers 28, when it's stipulating all of this stuff for it, right? So for instance, the daily burnt offerings there is 2 bulls, 1 ram, and 7 lambs. In Ezekiel, it's 7 bulls and 7 rams, so the most expensive and best things, right? In the daily sin offering in Numbers is 1 goat. The daily sin offering in Ezekiel is also 1 goat. The grain offering is 3/10 of an ephah, so like 6.6 liters in Numbers. But then in Ezekiel 45, it's 22 liters. I'll just use our terminology. So you can see it's growing, right? There's not really a specified oil offering in Numbers. And then in Ezekiel, it's 3.6 liters of oil, which is a lot, right? That's expensive. All this is saying is like it's pointing out that there's going to be this future, effective and beautiful Passover that is going to take place here, and it also kind of changes the dates and um, not the dates as much, but it changes the timing of the festivals and things like that, which is uh, you wouldn't know unless you were familiar with that section of the Torah. But all that is important only because it's pointing out how this is kind of God's plan for the people of Israel, right? It has this future greater redemption, this future hope that there is going to be this holy place that is going to be accessible and valid for the people of Israel. And whether or not this is supposed to be a literal place, as in it's literally going to have, this huge temple complex, or whether it's going to be a metaphorical place, right? That's not really known until what we see happened in Christ, where we see this ultimate Passover, and then you see people responding to that, and you realize that all of these metaphors and visions that the prophets have are fulfilled and completed in what Jesus does, where you actually see, Passover celebrated and made true for the final time in God passing over the sins of the world through the cross. But then you also see the river of life. You see all of these other things that Ezekiel is going to play with in his visions of the temple, right? That the temple is no longer bound to Jerusalem, but extends over the world, really. And that is even made more clear in Revelation and things like that. So that's what we talked about today. It's pretty deep in the weeds, but it's still interesting. How often are you going to read a passage like this? So I hope you guys found that interesting, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Peace out.